I'm Corey Proffitt-Boyd, and this is Say It Anyway.
Say it anyway with Corey Proffitt-Boyd. Say it anyway. Say it anyway with Corey Proffitt-Boyd. Say it anyway.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Say It Anyway. I'm Corey Proffitt-Boyd, and today I want to talk about something that took me a very long time to understand. But before I get started, I want to say something important. I'm not a therapist or a psychologist. I'm not even a mental health professional at all. I'm simply sharing my own experiences and some things I've learned about myself over the years. Because sometimes our stories help other people feel a little less alone. And that's my intention with each episode of this podcast. You know, when I was younger, I thought adulthood worked a certain way. I thought you grew up, you moved on, you got older, and whatever happened in childhood stayed in childhood. That's what I thought. What nobody told me was that sometimes the things we survive don't stay where they happened. Sometimes they follow us. Sometimes they show up years later wearing different clothes, and for a very long time, I didn't realize I was still carrying some of them. One thing I've learned is that when you're a kid, whatever happens in your house feels normal. You don't know any different. You don't have anything to compare it to. You assume every family is like yours. In my case, addiction was common on both sides of my family. It was simply part of life. It wasn't something I sat around analyzing. It was just there. The same way some families always had sweet tea in the refrigerator. Some families always had a garden. Some families always watched the same TV shows. Addiction was just part of the landscape. And when something is part of the landscape, you stop noticing it. You don't realize how much it shaped you. You don't realize how much it influenced what you believed was normal. Not until much later. As I got older, I started noticing things about myself. I could read a room almost instantly. I could tell when something felt off. And I could tell when someone was upset or when tension was building. I could tell when somebody wasn't telling the whole truth. And for years, I thought those things were simply personality traits. And maybe they are. But I've also come to wonder if some of those things were survival skills. Because when you're growing up in unpredictable situations, you learn to pay attention. You learn to watch, to anticipate, and to adapt. The problem is that sometimes the skills that help us survive childhood don't always help us thrive as adults. Sometimes we keep using old tools long after we need them. For a long time, I thought I was doing fine, and in many ways, I was. I went to work, I paid my bills, I showed up for people, laughed, made plans. I built a life. From the outside, everything looked normal. But I was also drinking a lot. Not every alcoholic looks like the stereotype. I certainly didn't. I wasn't missing work or sleeping on park benches. I wasn't what people picture when they hear the word alcoholic. I was highly functioning. But what I eventually learned is that functioning and healing are not the same thing. You can be functioning and still hurting. You can be functioning and still avoiding. You can be functioning and still carrying things you don't know how to face. And that's exactly where I was. Then something happened. October 1st, 2019. It's a date I'll never forget. The best way I know how to describe it is that I had an awakening. Something shifted. Something became crystal clear. I suddenly saw things differently. And from that day forward, I quit alcohol and I quit tobacco, cold turkey. And I've never gone back. People often ask how I did it. The truth is, I don't always know how to explain it. I just know something changed. For the first time in my life, it's like I was fully awake to what I was doing and why I was doing it. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Now, here's the part I never expected. Therapy. Because where I grew up, people didn't talk about therapy. You just pushed through, handled your business, you kept moving. You didn't sit around discussing your feelings. At least that's what I thought. So it took me a long time to admit that I needed therapy. A very long time. And to be honest, I wish I'd gone much sooner. Not because therapy magically fixed everything, and not because somebody waved a wand and made all my problems disappear, but because therapy gave me something I'd never really given myself before. A place to tell the truth, be completely honest, ask questions, and a place to basically connect the dots. And some of those dots stretched all the way back into childhood. One of the biggest surprises of adulthood was realizing that I wasn't always reacting to the present. Sometimes I was reacting to things that happened a very long time ago. That realization changed everything for me, because suddenly I wasn't asking, what's wrong with me? I was asking, where does this come from? That's a very different question. And sometimes the answers were uncomfortable. Sometimes they were heartbreaking. Sometimes they made perfect sense. But they helped me understand myself with a little more compassion. For years, I thought therapy was for people who were broken. I really did. And maybe some of you listening have thought the same thing. What I eventually learned was that therapy didn't show me I was broken. It showed me that I wasn't. It showed me that a lot of my struggles made sense when I understood the bigger picture. It showed me that some of the things I had spent years criticizing myself for had roots I never bothered to examine. And that was incredibly freeing. Now, don't get me wrong. Therapy can also be funny. I walked in thinking we'd discuss one or two things. Turns out we had enough material for several seasons. Basically, I walked in thinking I was bringing a carry-on bag. Apparently, I arrived with a moving truck instead. And some days, you just have to laugh about that, because healing is serious, but life is still funny. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Surviving something and healing from something are not always the same thing. I've survived a lot. Maybe you did too. But survival isn't the finish line. Sometimes it's just the beginning. Sometimes healing starts years later, sometimes decades later. Sometimes after a conversation or a loss. Sometimes after a wake-up call. And sometimes after finally deciding to ask for help. So, maybe some of us aren't carrying baggage because we're weak. Maybe we're carrying it because we've been strong for a very long time. Maybe we've spent years holding things together, years convincing ourselves that we're fine. And maybe real strength isn't pretending nothing hurts. Maybe real strength is being honest enough to admit that something does. I know that's been true for me. And if any part of my story sounds familiar, I hope you know you're not alone. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Take care of yourselves. Be kind to yourselves. And whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it forever. I'm Corey Proffitt-Boyd, and until next time, say it anyway.
Say it anyway with Corey Proffitt-Boyd. Say it anyway. Say it anyway with Corey Proffitt-Boyd. Say it.